All right, well, let's get started. Thank you all for being here, and looking forward to this morning's presentation. I'll open with a prayer that Diane provided that comes from the Episcopal Public Policy Network. Off the phone. It's called for Restoration of Wisdom and Renewal of Our Call to Care for Creation. God of wisdom, you made us to delight and tend your creation. We give you thanks for the ability to study and steward its wonder. We lament all the ways that scientific research has been affected by funding cuts and uncertainty, especially research that would help us address climate change and protect biodiversity. Forgive our short-sightedness, our greed, and the falsehoods and confusion that lead to harmful decisions. Enlighten our paths with your mercy, compassion, and truth. Give us boundaries that enable us to walk as wise tenders of your earthly garden in harmony with your creation. Through Jesus Christ, our companion and friend. Amen.
Amen.
And now,
I'd just like to share St. Paul's land acknowledgement. And, oh my goodness, I'm in the wrong place. Okay. Just 1 second. St. Paul's Cathedral acknowledges that we gather on unceded Kumeyaay land. We value the knowledge, culture, and worldview of Indigenous people. We commit to the vital work of educating ourselves, increasing community awareness, and promoting reconciliation with our Indigenous neighbors. As we examine actions and practices that perpetuate harm against Indigenous communities, we pledge to work toward a meaningful and respectful relationship as we follow their example in honoring this sacred land. And Gary, I'd like to pass it to Gary Brown, who is a member of Christ Church Coronado.
Hi, good morning.
We need it for recording. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Just want to introduce our panelists here. Helen, standing up right there, Davis, as you will soon hear, is a British-born applied scientist with a career focused on environmental matters. Her experience includes brownfield redevelopment, water quality, and wastewater treatment. She's a longtime member of St. Andrews by the Sea in Pacific Beach. Diane, you all know. I only know Diane as a volunteer extraordinaire. As we came out as I came in this morning, we didn't talk about this panel. We talked about the immigration, and for example, she's going out to the detention center to help a person out there. When is it, Diane? Wednesday, yeah. And she goes to immigration court as well. Luke Morton, I know more about Luke than I want to say because his mother goes to Christ Church. So boy, do I... Anyway. But beyond what his mother said, he's an excellent son, of course. He's been attending Christ Church and grew up attending the day school. But beyond that, he had a little bit of education by going to Stanford. But
I was going to call it the Stanford Junior University. No one knows that.
He wrote me that, and I said, what is LSJU? I had to look it up. Tell him what it is.
Stanford Junior University.
Yeah, and I thought it was a junior university for a second. He has a degree in earth systems and civil and environmental engineering. He's now a building code consultant for energy efficiency and renewable energy. He's taught courses at San Diego City College in energy systems and energy efficient buildings. He lives in San Diego, and in the best tradition of saving energy, he biked here.
I was lazy.
Well, I'd like to ground us in faith as we usually do in these wonderful forums. This September, St. Paul's is celebrating the season of creation, a time for people of faith to recognize our relationship with all of God's good creation. This theme this year is Peace with Creation, taken from Isaiah 32, verses 14 to 18. Before the reading itself, we hear that once again God is unhappy with the people. In the reading, to paraphrase, our misdeeds result in harm. But God sends down the Spirit, and the wilderness becomes a fruitful field. Then justice and righteousness will remain. The work of righteousness will be peace. To connect the reading and our forum topic today, we have agency in this critical time of climate disruption. In this dark time, we are blessed with the Spirit who, through prayer and contemplation, guides us in an awareness of the climate reality. The Spirit leads us, through community, to take action on behalf of God's good creation. Our baptism and confirmation vows reinforce this promise. First, will you seek and serve Christ in all persons, loving your neighbor as yourself? When we love our neighbors as ourselves, we want them to have resources to sustain life, including clean water, air, and soil. When the water, air, and soil are contaminated, when people must leave their homes because the land is not habitable or non-existent because of ocean rise or other fossil fuel-related climate change, and we could be doing something about it but don't, how are we loving our neighbors? Next, will you strive for justice and peace among all people and respect the dignity of every human being? We strive for justice and peace and respect their rights, which increases their sense of dignity when we do whatever is in our power with God's help to care for God's good creation. Simply Living, St. Paul's Creation Care Ministry, and many other ministries of the Episcopal Church have offered ideas, resources, and advocacy opportunities to live out this part of our baptismal covenant. In collaboration with our Episcopal Diocese Creation Care Community and other supportive organizations, through the promotion of smart energy use today, we are sharing just one of the many ways we can follow our baptismal covenant and further our mission to green the Cathedral, enhancing our ministries at the same time. Smart energy use can support the good work of our congregations to repair the environmental harms where repairable or reparable, and better prepare us for harms that may be irreversible. That's loving our neighbors. As thoughtful Episcopalians, we are aware of the importance of science in addressing the climate crisis, now more than ever in this political atmosphere that stifles the very innovation and development we need. Through the Episcopal Church's General Convention resolutions, dioceses, congregations, and congregants are reinforced in developing practical, responsible means, like smart energy use, to care for creation. And I will pass it along to Helen. Oh, Helen will share more about the science. I knew there was a segue about behind our faith to call for care for creation.
Thank you, Diane. I think you'll find this a refresher. You've probably heard all this information. If you look over there, you'll see a graph that I put up on the wall. Do you know what it is? Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Increase in CO2.
Excuse me, Sue?
An increase in CO2.
Yes. Is that showing an increase in CO2? Yes, it's called the Keeling curve, and I'd like to tell you a bit more about it. So, in 1958, Dr. Keeling from Scripps Institute of Oceanography, just up the road, installed a daily monitoring station to measure CO2 concentrations in the air on Mauna Loa, Hawaii. It's a hard life being a scientist. And in 1988, he published his findings based on 30 years of data. And that's what he produced. It's the Keeling curve. I remember when it came out, it was quite shocking. So what it showed was that on a yearly basis, you can see a fluctuation in carbon dioxide in the northern hemisphere. That's pretty amazing. The atmosphere around our Earth, we can see a difference. And Dr. Keeling noticed that it was doing what that strange-looking attempt at a synovial curve is showing. So the CO2 goes up in the winter and then down in June. And then in the fall, it starts increasing. So Dr. Keeling postulated that during the time when plants grow, the great green growing season, also known as the Sundays, the days after Pentecost, it goes down. So if you can remember your high school biology, plant tissues are grown by fixing carbon from the air in the form of CO2, which is carbon dioxide. So Dr. Keeling said, yes, this makes sense. So when we're having more plants growing, we have a reduction, and then as they follow their normal life cycle and they die out, they decay and release CO2 back into the atmosphere. Another thing that was quite shocking about the Keeling curve was that with its shape, it indicates that there's an outside source of carbon in the atmosphere. I think if it was a steady state system where there's nothing else coming in, it would be more of a straight line. And so Dr. Keeling hypothesized that there is another source of carbon dioxide coming out of the air. And he attributed it to human use of energy, specifically oil and coal. Coal was largely put down during the Carboniferous period. And so a few years, 40 years later nearly, we can see the curve still going up. What efforts we have made have not had an impact on humans' discharge of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So what's the big deal? We all breathe carbon dioxide. So the reason it's an issue is because carbon dioxide in the atmosphere acts as a kind of blanket. It prevents energy from radiating from the Earth. So if that process doesn't happen, the Earth gets warmer. And so we have the condition called the phenomenon. I try to avoid this word, the phenomenon of global warming, or the greenhouse effect. It's kind of overwhelming seeing this. And in March 2024, we were surprised to see that the annual increase was greater than that was measured to date. That shows that the process is accelerating. It's overwhelming. I'm tempted to want to think about it later, but we don't have that option. We're already seeing the impacts of this in San Diego. Anyone who's aware of our June bloom in San Diego will know that our weather is affected by the heat, the temperature in the air and in water. Excuse me, I need to remind my flow. So other examples of what we are experiencing is that with increased weather extremes, 2 years ago in September 2023, we experienced a tropical storm, a rare phenomenon, and also we're seeing more violent hurricanes around North America. And so with the increased fire risk and extreme weather from climate change, insurance companies are pulling out of California. My development is unable to get homeowners insurance. And also, our neighbors were affected with an extreme storm in January that particularly affected the Troyers Creek community. So these are real effects from climate change. Looking out across the Pacific, the Carteret Islands have been evacuated because of the impact of climate change, and more islanders will follow. How is inaction living up to our baptismal promise to strive for peace and justice and respect for every human being? Thank you.
Let me, so what do you do about the terrible conditions that, Helen described? I'm just going to speak very briefly because Luke knows what to do a lot better than I do. But let me give you, from my amateur's perspective, some examples of what the Northern Diocese of California has done. A couple of years ago, the diocese involved 40 churches in an effort to find out, if you want to go somewhere, you first better figure out where you are and then draw a path. So the first step in figuring out where you are is to do an energy assessment, church by church by church. But just to give you a few examples, St. Augustine of Canterbury in Rockland. I don't even know where some of these places are. But their largest space was the least used space. And people were constantly there adjusting the heating or the air conditioning. They installed a smart thermostat. These are not major expenses. They can program the large space, and the system, if people go in there and adjust it, after a certain time, the system reverts to the schedule that's programmed into it. It's like hacking human behavior. St. Paul's in Sacramento, they changed all their lights to LEDs. They put in programmable thermostats. They replaced their old HVAC system with a new, much more efficient one. This one interested me. They right-sized meetings with the room size. For example, I don't know your facilities here, but certainly we could all be sitting in a smaller room if the church had it. Let's use that room. And they're very strict about making sure, I guess, people density counts. And as Luke will tell you, density in a whole community counts. Well, for example, Christ Church, a huge percentage of people live within 5 to 8 blocks of the church. There's no excuse for people to drive to church. I have a lot more examples, but my first, what lessons might we learn from these examples? First, it's possible to cut your energy bill and your energy use and your carbon footprint. Electrification uses a lot less carbon than your gas and oil. One of the churches completely changed out their systems, the cooking system, not just your heating. Another lesson is you need to have a plan of action, which starts from measuring where are you now. And then we're not talking about highly scientific measurements of your impact. Look at your darn utility bill. And it shows you not just the cost, but it shows you how many units you're using of electricity, of other fuels, and so on. Go for the easiest steps quickly. Changing out all your lights to LEDs at your house or at church, no big deal. It can add up in a church. HVAC is a big use of your energy. Northern California and the consultant who we spoke to in Texas, it can be using up to 70% of your energy usage. Seek grants or subsidies. Now, I haven't kept track with the current administration. I'm not sure how good that's going. And you need to get started once you get in your energy audits. The overriding feeling maybe, this is beyond me. But if each of us can take a little step in our own use, we can help. And then in a broader context of society, I think each of us needs to consider political action as a way to move our society more in line with the rest of the world right now. So, Luke, tell us some more specific.
Sure.
While I'm plugging this in, thank you for those examples, Gary. I wasn't sure about those results from that Northern California effort. And am I surprised at any of those? No. In my work as a consultant, it's like, oh yeah, no, good. My educated guesses around what's prudent and what's effective in church facilities, which is not a building prototype or type that I have personally audited myself, but it is, it just resonates 100%. And other points I want to reflect on. It's once you dig into it, I hope that it feels really easy. It's like, oh yeah, no, there's some really easy stuff we can do. The challenge with this world, carbon dioxide is not a visible gas. Energy consumption, we can see these lights up here, but most of it is not immediately visible or salient to us as individuals. You're like, oh, well, a quick example on that, I did an energy audit at my grandmother's house in Coronado once upon a time, because she had high utility bills. And I went through and I measured each and everything. I'm like, Grandma, you're not using anything. And then I found it. It was in the bathroom, and it was a towel rack warmer. It was plugged in and never been unplugged for 30 years. And I was like, there it was, just heating the space, an electric space heater. And I'm like, yeah, well, no one saw it. It took me to actually go to physically measure the darn thing, see it was plugged in. And then it was like, oh, unplug. That was easy. And that's where I hope and that's the goal of this audit idea. I'm going to sort of end off in some of these more concrete steps, but I'm hoping whether or not an audit is completely necessary, you might not actually get there. There's a lot of advice you can take from, you'll hear from me and Gary, electrify everything, and let's start measuring it, and hopefully some other really easy steps will come out. Okay, now with that said, I'm going to take several steps back because I didn't know some of this stuff going into this presentation. So I was really trying to come away with this. The goal of this was to provide a framework of sorts to support some of these conclusions. And get, a lot of us are on different backgrounds, we have some real technical expertise in the audience, as well as some of you where this might be newer material. So give us a common glossary. That's what the goal of my presentation today was. And to hopefully inspire more questions that we can round up in a Q&A and take away. I'm really most interested in our time in having people come away every time with better questions about how they can act in this world. So, and yeah, I was already introduced, so I'll skip this one. Definitions, so brief overview, some definitions, energy efficiency, conservation, carbon neutrality, give some framework, some terminology, give you guys a glossary around this. Some context around the US and California energy systems. I've taken some of that stuff out because I want to keep this quick so we can get to some real discussion. And then some back and forth here around, to some extent we're talking about energy efficiency, but also talking about alignments, but not perfect alignments with carbon neutrality. And obviously I want to get to the end with some more concrete ideas, a menu of ideas, give some added flavor to that. Okay, terminology, energy efficiency. This is your classic chart around energy efficiency. Energy efficiency is really formally defined as, well, you divide what you want to get out of a process and divide that by what you had to input into that process. And that ratio, that's energy efficiency. I'll give you some examples here. So actually, question for you all. How, for every 100 gallons you input into a vehicle, how many gallons in this, say, passenger car type, how many gallons of that gasoline are being used to move that car down the road? Anyone, order of magnitude? Say again? 50%. 50%, I hear 50%. Good guess, yeah. 60%. That feels good. Okay, the real answer, 14%. Now, when you look at this chart, and I don't expect you to read, now the efficiency of the engine itself is around 40%. So you guys weren't too far off, but how much gets bled away with friction, with real physical forces? And some people look at this chart and they're like, oh, 14%, that's pretty good. Oh yeah, it used to be 5%, but we've done a lot. We have spent $1 trillion in R&D to get that 5% efficiency up to 14%. We're doing great, guys. But yeah, your takeaway, I do intend that to be a kind of reflection on our cars. Now, when you divide that, how much of that, how many gallons is it, are you using of 100 to get you down the road? That's less than a gallon of that 100. Whether or not it's a kind of a bit of a Rorschach test, but it still is make the point. It's well, if you walk there, not that that's practical, but that would be a lot less gasoline. Or if you took other modes of transportation, that's where some of these calculations end up being very different in the outcome. Okay, let's do another quick version, and this is going to support a kind of concept I want to introduce you to, which is kind of our energy system. So we have a light bulb here. I'm going to imagine an old incandescent bulb, tungsten filament. Order of magnitude, how efficient is that light bulb? 40%. 40. 10%. I hear 10%. Well, 6%. Okay. Now we don't see these anymore. They're almost illegal here in California. How efficient are the poles and wires that deliver the electricity to your house? Anyone? 10%. 10%?
20.
20, actually 94. That's really good. No, I hear this commonly as misunderstood. Utilities, they have a job to do. They don't want to, because they get to pay that end. That's before the meter, they pay for that. A lot of utilities are profit-seeking entities like, no, we can do a lot better than 10% efficient. Now, here's where you might be getting into this, and this gets back to the physicists in the room. How efficient, now this is an old, say, coal-powered power plant or a gas single cycle gas turbine, about how efficient is that power plant? 20%. 40, yeah. Well, give or take, I've got a coal example, so 33%, 40, it's in that range. And so that's where 2/3, well, give or take, of that energy, that coal or gas input is going straight up either the smokestack or through a cooling tower. And that's physics. That's a different lecture, but and so in the end, our effective, with this system boundary, the effective efficiency of that light bulb is 2%. Out of 100 units of energy going into that power plant, 2 are ending up as light. Now, where the next concept I want to go to is, what if you doubled the efficiency of that light bulb? How much energy of input at the beginning could you save? And that's where there's this leverage, this multiplier effect upstream. And that's going to be a recurring theme we'll see in the efficiency world of, you make the consumption more efficient, and there's large multiplying upstream impacts on that. As we're getting into more renewable energy areas, sometimes we're not worried about the input efficiency of the input of solar energy, so the metrics kind of change a little bit. But I wanted to have this idea out there for the power of energy efficiency, when and where you can find that low-hanging fruit. So some takeaway concepts, multiplier effect. Some of the effects are not as salient, like how many of you guys know about our utility grid? It's not something, we pay a utility bill, and right? That's all we know about it. And it turns out that there's large regional differences. The grid of the Northeast is substantially different from the grid of California. I'll get to some slides on that later, but to give us a more local context and flavor for what we're dealing with in California. And some really good stuff that's happening, but also introduces new challenges and problems that we get to address. Okay, brief menu of energy efficiency ideas. Some of this was already kind of mentioned out there, but kind of common stuff you'll hear out there. Improve insulation in your building envelope. Great. Better windows, sure. Air sealing, seal up stuff so there's not air leakage too from the outside. So this would work for a church as well as for a home. Then there's ventilation optimization. The stuff that Gary mentioned is HVAC, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. I'll spell that out in case you have. For us nerds in there, it's like HVAC, But heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. And water heating efficiency, so those are big. Lighting retrofits, Gary already mentioned those. And more efficient appliances. We can dial into some specifics on that in the Q&A, and I'll show some pictures later on of things I think you'll be, like most churches would be considering, and to give some pictures to Gary's examples from Northern California. Okay, quick aside, dad joke. Oh shoot, I missed it. Oh no, there it is. I showed you the punchline first. Okay, that's Exxon Valdez oil spill. What does a solar energy spill look like? A nice day. Okay, palate cleanser. All right, energy conservation. So we talked about energy efficiency, which is like what you get, what you want, and what you have divided by what you pay for in input. So energy conservation is a slightly more general category in my work, and these aren't necessarily formally defined. They're often mentioned in the same breath, energy efficiency, conservation. But how I like to draw a distinction with the difference is if we define conservation as prevention of wasteful use of a resource. So efficiencies are straight, numerator divided by denominator. But conservation is trying to get at, well, is that really efficient light bulb? It's it's really efficient. It's on in a room, but no one's in that room. Can we turn that thing off? That's an energy conservation measure. It's efficient, but it's not we're not conserving energy because it's not useful, and there's some subjectivity there. But that's where the smart thermostats, that's where these lighting sensors come in. When and where they're prudent and appropriate, that's kind of the local determination that churches can make. You can go and do it, and I'm just like, that light, people always leave the light on in Hind Hall in Christ Church in Coronado. It's like, well, maybe we should get an occupancy sensor, but set it with a long, like an hour delay, so there's not nuisance shut-offs when people are having a meeting and they have to wave their arms around or whatever. Or you get ones with ultrasonic sensors, so you clap your hands and it'll turn on again. There are a variety of activities to try to make these conservation efforts not a nuisance, to avoid that problem, which I think we've all experienced. But to get that, most of the conservations are built around how do we turn stuff off? And it turns out to be kind of hard to do it, or can we reduce the cognitive load? Oh yeah, I forgot to turn off the light, Okay, have some technology automatically do it. Okay, now last general talk I'm going to talk about is carbon neutrality and kind of the framework that we use at least in buildings or a lot of corporate technology here. So this is a complex slide. Up at the top, we have our greenhouse gas emissions. The main culprit we're talking about with the Keeling curve is carbon dioxide, it's CO2, but there's also myriad others. SF6 is kind of exotic, that's sulfur hexafluoride, but I've dealt with that one. That's used occasionally in dielectrics and tracer gases and stuff. Anyway, but there's methane. Actually, the other one I want to call out is methane, because methane is natural gas. And that's when a newer one in our work on the efficiency side, because it turns out we have a huge natural gas grid that's serving our homes. Now, even if we have a really efficient appliance like a tankless gas water heater, it turns out every time that tankless gas water heater turns on, there's a little puff of methane prior to the ignition of the natural gas. And that ends up being, and methane has an 80 times multiplier of equivalence to carbon dioxide. So it's a powerful greenhouse gas. And one we're growing awareness of maybe really should be focusing on either tightening up our gas systems or maybe ultimately trying to dismantle them or reappropriate them so we're not running our economy on gas.
I have to mention, that's why it's so important for people all around the region to try to avoid organic waste going into the landfill.
So I'll make that for the audience, an importance for organic waste in the landfill. Even though landfills, good landfills should be managing their methane, because natural biodegradation is methane, is producing largely methane. So that's why you'll see, actually there's a flare if you go to the dump. They're flaring up methane from the natural decomposition of organic waste. And at least get it aerobically digested, so that it's carbon dioxide being released, and that's biogenic. Anyway, that's a whole other thing. Okay, up at the top are greenhouse gas emissions. There's scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. Scope 1, let me jump into the next slide. This will give examples that are appropriate to the church. Scope 1 is really direct emissions from that facility. So you Google Earth view of the church, and you're like, okay, what are carbon dioxide emissions or even methane directly from that site? And that's really for the church. Space heating, you got a furnace. Water heating, you got a gas water heater. And cooking, you got a gas cooktop. Those are things that are direct combustion produce carbon dioxide. So that's scope 1. Scope 2 is effectively electricity. That's the church is consuming electricity, and then there's essentially not one-to-one, but effectively one-to-one relationship between you consume electricity and there's a carbon footprint to that electricity at that moment. Because somewhere in that world there's a natural gas or some kind of power plant burning something to provide that electricity. Though that's changing now. Scope 3 is a little bit more nebulous. So this is emissions that are not produced by the church itself and are not the result of those activities like electricity consumption, but are still involved in the church. So the example I think of, and the big one, is commutes or transportation to and from that church. But for that church not being there, you wouldn't have gotten into the car to go to church. So that's scope 3 is the most nebulous as well as the most difficult to address, but it's still one that I find important to try to quantify so that you have a full idea of what each facility is impacting, and maybe you can try to think of ways to marginally reduce it. Okay. So this is California-wide. I'm going to go big picture here. We're going to look at the size of these boxes around California's greenhouse gas portfolio across the state. The takeaway I want you to take is scope 1 is the smallest box. Direct emissions from sites, from homes, is the smallest box. And this is for all buildings. When that box is a really general box, so it's not really indicative necessarily of churches per se, but it probably is. All else being equal, it's a good starting point. Scope 2 is electricity. That's the bigger box. Scope 3 is transportation. That is the elephant in this room. And so that's why we're trying to go up that, look at all these scopes, manage what you can first measure it as best you can, and then find ways of bit by bit trying to manage it. So I'm going to give an example of that in the next couple of slides. This is a guesstimate, and it's all text. I apologize. I'll get into some graphical stuff later. But I was like, okay, my educated guess, what's a carbon footprint of a church? Just like I was imagining my home church of Christ Church, Coronado. So I don't have a utility bill, but this is easily gained from a utility bill. Okay, let's guess 800 therms per year. Okay, great. There's a carbon footprint to that, and it's chemistry. All right, burn 800 therms of natural gas, you get 4 tons of carbon dioxide per year. Now, okay, guesstimate. All right, 20,000 kilowatt hours of electricity. So that's 2.5 times the average single-family home, give or take, order of magnitude. There's a book in my engineering practice which is consider the spherical cow. How do you back of envelope guess? How many cows can fit into something? Or it's like, well, if a cow's kind of spherical, then we know how to equate a sphere. So let's back of envelope. Okay, scope 3. Now that's where, okay, guesstimate 100 parishioners driving 5 miles round trip once a week. Order of magnitude, that is more. Just that is more than the site and electricity right there. Okay, graphical form. There we go. I've got on the left side scope 1, domestic hot water cooking and space heating. Scope 2, electricity. Okay, so what if first measure? All right, well, let's electrify all this stuff. What does electrification look like? And it's really like, okay, we're just putting boxes, replacing boxes, or in this case a cylinder, with a different kind of cylinder. This is a water heater on the right. This is an example of a heat pump water heater. It's an electric water heater, but it's 300-ish %. For every 1 unit of electricity input, it can produce 3 times that amount of heating inside in the water. So it's an efficient use of electricity. It's all the rage these days in my projects. And you'll get some carbon reductions there. Now, heat pump space heating. This is, here, I'll show you a picture of that. What does that look like? That looks like an air conditioner. What's the difference between an air conditioner and, actually, raise your hands. How many of you have AC at home? I do. So, if you have an air conditioner, you have a heat pump already, except the air conditioner nominally is a heat pump that's only allowed to go one way. It's only allowed to move heat from inside your house to the outside. Now the difference, actually, the trick picture here, one of these is an air conditioner, the other is a heat pump. And I can't remember which it is, because the only difference between an air conditioner and a heat pump is a reversing valve. It just says, oh, I want to actually now heat the inside and air condition the outside in the wintertime. That's it. Otherwise, you already have heat pumps But most people, because have furnaces to provide heat, and there's now some, in my policy world, some movement to say, you know, when you change out an air conditioner, you should just replace it with a heat pump. You can keep the furnace, but at least allow that air conditioner to run in first cycle in the wintertime, so you can run electrically heat your home efficiently using electricity. And then if you're up in, say, Mount Laguna, like where I was last night, where it gets a little chilly, then you have a backup heating source. Anyway, I'm all about getting to yes with electrifying. Make it easy. If there's edge cases where you're like, well, you know, it gets really cold in here like one day a year. It's like, okay, fine. Keep your backup furnace heating for that one day. But otherwise, let's try to electrify as much as we can. Let's get to yes. This is the indoor distribution systems. You have your traditional ducted box if you poked up your head up in the attic. Pretty straightforward. And now your new ductless units. That's, anyway, just giving you guys an idea of what that looks like, because this will be the kind of nuts and bolts of a church project. Okay, cooking. I can't remember if this is an induction cooktop or a radiant electric resistance cooktop, because it's in some ways, I mean, they're both electric. They kind of both have the same, they plug into the wall. But yeah, they're much easier to clean than the gas burners. But that's, okay, so let's imagine we did that project. We replaced all those things, and you're like, hey, Luke, but didn't you just increase your electricity consumption like a bunch? I'm like, yeah, you did. And guess what? Like, that scope 1 disappeared. It's now 0. Now we moved it to scope 2, but if you imagine the size of those boxes and you squint at it, it's like, actually we're ahead of the game. We're making progress here. We electrified and reduced our carbon footprint. What do we do about the scope 2? It's like, oh, well, if only there was a way of producing 0 carbon electricity. Oh man. Okay, here we go. I forget which church this is, but here's your standard renewable PV system. Now is where the energy system rears its head in California of like, okay, we can do this on our churches, but let's imagine the system we're getting into. Okay, this chart I'm going to unpack, and I'm getting close to the end because I want to get to Q&A because I'm already at 20 minutes. So don't worry. The top green line, this is a picture of a snapshot of one day, 24 hours. There's the green line, which is showing the supply of electricity across the whole entire California grid. The purple line is beneath it, is showing the net supply when you subtract all the utility-based renewables, solar and wind. And notice that big cavity in the middle, and then the big rise, that's in my world, they would call that the duck curve. And notice actually, 20 years ago, this used to look like a big sinusoid, up and down, just a wave. It dips in the middle because we can't account for, that's an implicit accounting for behind the meter, site-built, building-installed solar panels. So that's already showing up in here too, but you can't see that. That's not measured. This is just showing the public grid. So what my takeaway here is, okay, when is the higher carbon electricity happening in California? It's happening at night, when the sun is not shining. Now, until we actually invest in satellite-based solar panels, which are a thing, you can look them up on NASA. We can get 24/7 solar power from space-based solar, but that's an idea. But okay, until we can get there, we have night and day. So how do we, can someone think of a way of like storing renewable energy so we can use it at night? There we go, it's called a battery. So showing the orange, so the orange line is showing the PV and wind curve explicitly. What we want to do is try to deploy that electricity at night. Okay, this is another complicated chart, but the green on top is renewables. The purple at the bottom is showing utility-based batteries, and this is completely changing the game for utilities, for our California grid, and hopefully where the rest of the world is going soon, and following along. But to the extent we can store that renewable energy and deploy it at night, and this includes at our church sites, but to evaluate, okay, when are we using electricity at the church? And if we're using some of it at night, then maybe we should also, it'd be prudent to invest in that battery system too, so that we can truly guarantee that we're eliminating that scope 2 part. Because and that's really hour by hour, day by day. The grid is always changing. So that's what, yeah, PV and batteries, and more is better, less is still good. To get to yes. We still have the travel part. I'm gonna punt on that a little bit, but I'm wrapping up. Here's some crude costs. I imagine we'll send out the slide deck for everyone later, but just in case, like order of magnitude, you guys at the end of the day, this is like, well, how much is this gonna cost? Well, here's the rules of thumb. Every site is gonna be a little different, and funding mechanisms. My general recommendation, so I was trying to, before Gary talked, I was like trying to think of what are the takeaways? Okay, let's try to measure it, quantify energy and greenhouse gas emissions, and do it the easy way, utility bills. Just, it's like plug it into a spreadsheet, it's pretty easy to do. And, ask the question, is there something on site that burns gas? Well, let's see how much it costs to electrify it. Sometimes it might be really complex and expensive to do it. Okay, go with the easy stuff. I'm all about getting to yes. Evaluate efficiency and conservation opportunities. That's where there's a little bit more of local involvement of because you have to think about as a church, you guys know the facilities better than anyone. Are there ways you can improve the effective utility of energy consumption at that site? And then consider if and when and where to integrate photovoltaics and batteries. Those might come with their own incentives and costs, so that might be another funding source. And then I had this, I'll list this down here at the end. My SOP to location efficiency, the scope 3 is, are there opportunities for urban and suburban church properties to build housing that would effectively, not at the church level, but as a region level, try to reduce the transportation and footprint, get people closer to each other in communities where more livable, walkable neighborhoods. There's a lot of other planning magic that needs to happen with that, but how do we get people to not have to commute 20, 40 miles a day to and from their work and around town and such? And that is a different kind of conversation. All right, I'm done. What's next? Thank you.
Well, on the transportation, I have to say, offering a unique, a different sort of solution. If churches would only convert to strict Judaism, you would only walk to the temple. So that's
good.
Anyway, let's get to questions. Yes, ma'am.
So I work in the area of light treatment on circadian rhythms, mood, and sleep. And I remember attending a meeting in Switzerland, and they combined this scientific group with architects and engineers to see how they could, work together to not only build more efficient buildings, but and a couple of things, just take-home points. Was first of all, the foyer where you meet in this is like the light is streaming through the ceiling. You're not in some dark, dim, and lots of plants in the room. My sister's an architect and saying how the move in architecture is to move more towards simplest, nature.
Yeah.
And like the example, the way not to go is I think it was the building for a student dorm in Santa Barbara.
Yes.
No window.
I love that. All right. It's such an interesting building. But go on, describe that.
So I was just wondering also, in applying to hospitals and outpatient clinics, I couldn't help noticing at UCSD they have those new outpatient facilities. There are lots of light on the periphery, but the poor staff are in the middle, and they're just, at their computers. And the new McGrath Pavilion, lots of high ceilings, but, the patients wait in a waiting room in the center, which is, dark and dim. And I understand that's not very efficient to have these big, high ceilings. And then the other question I wanted to ask, if you pull those together, in one of my neighbors is an engineer, and they're trying to pump out CO2 in the garage during the day. You know, it's on a timer, and instantly you go to your car and it's so noisy you feel like you're next to a jet engine, and he's trying to get it more like a thermostat. So if there's too much CO2, then you kick it out, but you don't do it if there's...
Okay, yeah, and my work, that would be demand-controlled ventilation. So in a space like this, I'll try to keep this as brief as possible, but in assembly rooms like this, there's a kind of a building code, because I work a lot in building codes for safety. It's like, oh, people need fresh air and ventilation air. And so there's a mandatory minimum, but when people aren't in the room, it's like, do we need to be pumping in all of this fresh air, and that needs to be heated and cooled 24/7? It's like, oh no, maybe we had this signal, like carbon dioxide, we're all exhaling carbon dioxide. There can be a sensor over there in the corner. They can say, oh, well, so it looks like there's people in the room, and it looks like they need ventilation. Let's open up that louver and provide them fresh air, and then we'll shut it down when they leave. When it goes back to 420 parts per million. That's, I guess, the latest in the Keeling curve. I can't remember exactly. But yeah, on the first question, I don't have a direct response to it, but because I work for architects, and that is more of an engineer, and I give broad deference to, what is it? Not Von Mies, Van der Rohe, Sim Van der Rohe, I think, had this notion, like a home is a machine for living. And what that machine does and how it works is a personal, it's both, we can generalize it, but it's also highly personal. And so that's where I want to empower, I have idiosyncratic, notions about my house too, but like that's where, to make sure it's right designed for you. And there are a lot of different ways of getting there. But that's the magic of good design, and yeah. Let's see.
Yeah, lest people wonder, our topic was designed to be, how can we support ministries with energy savings? And I don't want anybody to leave, oh, but they never talked about that. Just to mention it a little bit, because that's how the Diocese of Northern California got buy-in from people. Some of us care, maybe a little bit more than others about God's good creation in that respect. And some people say we need to be church communities that make sure we're using our money wisely, because there's only so much, and many churches are losing members. So you get less money. What can you do? The good thing about actually finding energy savings through the information that we've shared today is that you can support ministries with that extra savings. And once again, that was how the ED of Northern California and other church communities have convinced people. They see a major influx of money, and it may not be immediate, but over time. So I just wanted to mention that as something that we'd like to present to chapter when we can, when we are ready to do that. The good thing about not having the grants that were available in so many ways through our federal government is that now we have a little rest period to think about how we want to do this, so that when grants someday be available again, we can hit the ground running.
Yeah. You go first. Go ahead.
Could I ask? Okay,
Yeah.
so I really appreciate this. Has been really interesting, and Luke, your information was really quite provocative. But to Diane's point, so those of us who've made choices at home, we do it. Maybe we're motivated because it's the right thing to do. But so my family, as an example, has the one thing we are still trying to do is our heat pump hot water heater.
Yeah.
But we have when we put in the photovoltaic panels about 15 years ago, in less than 7 years we got our money back. So that was, we did batteries this past year. We're still looking to see the impact, but we think it's going to be pretty significant. The heat pump, when we put that in a couple of years ago, I mean, that paid for itself almost immediately.
Yeah.
But our real motivation was we wanted to do the right thing, and it was also cost effective. But for an institution such as this, we have to be stewards of the financial resources, and I know one church in the diocese made the choice to put in solar panels a few years ago, and they're saving 40% on their electricity bill, which to me is pretty significant, because I know that St. Paul's has a phenomenal electricity bill, and when this new building was built, this new space was built, it really upped the bill, even though this is like the lowest level LEED certified building. Okay, so this room is always too cold. I don't know, at least for me. And so, I mean, I think right there could be some cost savings. But I'm wondering when you're making a choice, because this is a combination of almost brand new facilities and some really older facilities that do need replacing. Some of the things like the gas stove, the kitchen and the Great Hall really needs updating. And it has a very inefficient commercial gas stove that has a pilot going all the time, so that type of thing. But you gave some information on the payback time, and I'm just wondering I think we've done a number of energy audits over the years and got most of the low-hanging fruit, I believe, although I don't know if we've gone to totally LEDs. Is Jen around? Is Jen still here? Yeah. Have we? I don't know in the older space, but can you give us an idea of where the because unless it's going to be financially make financial sense, I think it's a hard sell.
Yeah, you'll know, it's a great question. I appreciate getting us back. Okay, and I'll be quick about it. But I didn't give a lot of detail on that because actually I think first and foremost this is something where real world examples would help. But yes, I think that's where the prudential case of coming up, part of this, there's a little bit of hand waviness around doing your own energy audits and then figuring out, okay, what are the opportunities here? Let's package these up and find, okay, this boiler system in this, okay, this is hard, or this is expensive. Okay, maybe ideally we wrap that in, but maybe there's a way to get that in there with the added renewables and come away as a whole package where it's cash flow positive in terms of financing. But that I can give, you gave some general examples from your house, and I think that would be indicative of the church facilities themselves. And outside of that, general advice of like, oh, we're replacement, okay, great, then change it out for something else. There's a cost to that, maybe a little bit, but hopefully we'll save energy and it'll be a no-brainer in the long run, and so it'll be an easy story to sell.
Can people like yourself make estimates about what?
Yeah. So yeah, that's what like part of it, like I do as well as other energy auditors, is essentially trying to figure out what is that real, what are the energy costs right now, and how can we parlay that into energy savings, and where that investment is prudent, and also is a win-win-win.
And I think one more thing is your energy bill is going, it's not staying level. So if it were something to factor that in.
There's a lot of shifting sands here in terms of the costs as well as in the subsidies and such. Okay, one more quick one.
Thank you very much for everyone speaking, and Luke for giving us a very good tour through energy context. The thing that I wanted to bring up just in the context of the Scope 3 and then what potentially could be a Scope 4 could be related to the land use questions, and I think it's questions that you're raising over here in the last question you posed. We have urban, suburban, and then rural potential. And the components that we were talking about before about increased fire risk, increased land use management, that dovetail with the transport questions.
It's breaking up a little bit,
that dovetail with the transport questions. are critical in California. We know that the greenhouse gas emissions from wildfire are increasing. They're not in the inventory,
Right.
But the transport section is the largest. The competition between wildfire and transport now in California is very high, but they're not in the greenhouse gas inventory, right?
Yeah.
So we need to think about, as church communities or individual communities, how we're managing those systems. Keep that in our mind, and then as we think about many of the options that you've provided, those questions on how we're sourcing those materials. We know that PV does have great potential, but it also has the life cycle analysis costs associated with that. Batteries are the same thing.
Yep.
So thinking about the lifetime of whatever purchase we're making and that equipment and the end of life of that is very critical. So I would just suggest that as we think, broader about what purchases are made, how we can increase the efficiency, the conservation, and other modes, that we consider that sourcing, that we consider also scope 3 to be critical, scope 4 as a potential.
Great. I take that as a thank you.
If anyone is interested from the Cathedral in helping us navigate some of this, put together a plan, support it, ask for chapter assistance because we will need it. This isn't what do they say, this isn't a sprint, it's kind of a marathon because it will take a long time for us to get everyone on the same page. We have to leave. Thank you very much for being here. If you are interested in helping us in Simply Living, support this good work, please sign up. It doesn't commit you completely, but we'd like to hear your concerns and questions and see if you can help us out. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Because next week is Blessing of the Animals, there's no forum, we tried to bring in some guests, the celebrity animals, but they had scheduling conflicts. In 2 weeks, we think we're going to have a speaker from USD talking about binational issues